4 years ago tonight, November 5th, 4 years ago, was actually the night after the 2008 presidential election. We voted November 4th last time. We vote November 6th this time. So November 5th, tonight, 4 years ago, was the night after Barack Obama just walloped John McCain in that year's presidential election. You might remember the Electoral College map that year. The Electoral College total, 365 electoral votes for Obama and only 173 for John McCain. Barack Obama won that presidential election with almost 100 electoral votes to spare. After that decisive and emotional victory, on this night 4 years ago, the country started to turn from appreciating what had happened the night before, appreciating what had just happened in that historic election, toward what was going to happen next. Now that we had Barack Obama as not just a candidate or as the winner, but as the next president, as the successor to 2 terms of George W. Bush. Elections have consequences. Elections are not just the end of a campaign. The concession speech, the victory speech, these are the sounds of a starting pistol for what the voters have signaled may now begin. Elections aren't just about picking someone who we would like to win a contest. We are hiring someone to start work. Elections have consequences. Remember?
I earned capital in the campaign, political capital, and now I intend to spend it. It is my style. That's what happened after the 2000 election. I earned some capital. I've earned capital in this election, and I'm going to spend it.
If Bush had capital and his election had consequences, how much capital does Barack Obama have now? And what are the consequences of his lopsided victory? Today is a new world, and it is a new world about which we know very little. The question tonight is not what just ended. We know what just ended. The question is, what happens now? That was 4 years ago tonight, November 5th. It was the night after the 2008 election. And now, of course, we can answer that question. Now we know what happened. Now, as we make our decision again as a country as to whether or not Barack Obama should remain president or whether he should be replaced by a new Republican challenger, we now know what he would do with the office of the presidency because we have seen him do it.
The White House started this day on a much different note as President Obama signed his first bill into law. The new law makes it easier for workers to sue for pay discrimination.
With the stroke of a pen, another big break from the Bush era. Democrats in Congress have been trying to get this equal pay law through for nearly 2 years. Today it became a reality.
The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act for Women, that was this president's first order of business. It was the first bill that he signed into law. And signing that bill was the start of a lot more very quickly.
Today, the president signs the bill imposing new rules on credit card companies. The bill is aimed at sparing consumers from sudden interest rate hikes.
Today, President Obama signs a bill that gives the Food and Drug Administration unprecedented power to regulate tobacco. The bill will allow the FDA to reduce nicotine in tobacco products, block labels such as low, tar, and light, and tobacco companies will also have to put large graphic warnings on cartons of cigarettes.
Lester, the president and Democrats can point to one imminent success here in Washington for the marchers. That is the imminent passage of a hate crimes bill that it would make it a federal crime to commit an assault based on sexual orientation.
The Senate has passed a bill that the president has been pushing that would extend government-sponsored health insurance for about 4 million uninsured children.
Children's health insurance for 4 million kids, a hate crimes bill, tobacco regulation, credit card reform. President Obama, along with a Democratic House and Democratic Senate, got to work fast out of the gate on addressing the crises they were handed from the previous administration, but also on spending that political capital on problems that had lingered in this country for years, but were always just being kicked down the road.
The president did make an additional bit of history, a major revamping of how college student loans are going to be handed out for years to come. The legislation ends a 45-year program that provided federal subsidies to banks and private lenders that offered government-backed college loans. Starting July 1st, those guaranteed loans will be offered only by the Department of Education.
Three major figures of the Democratic Party, President Obama, Senator Ted Kennedy, and former President Bill Clinton, all gathered together with Republican Orrin Hatch for the signing of the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act. The bill triples the size of the country's national service programs, which are known as AmeriCorps.
We also have new numbers tonight on just how successful this Cash for Clunkers trade-in program actually was in the end.
Thanks to the Cash for Clunkers program, pretty much entirely to it, it's going to be a pretty solid August in terms of those auto sales. Now,
it ended up being a lot of very solid auto sales months. The rescue of the American auto industry, despite its critics at the time, you know who I'm talking about, that rescue of the American auto industry worked, and it worked like gangbusters. There was also the tripling in size of America's national service programs, as you heard Chris describe there, and a fundamental reform of this country's broken but now fixed student loan system. There was also the small matter of pulling the country back from the brink of a second Great Depression.
Less than a month in office, and the president made dramatic history with a simple stroke of the pen.
There you go. Let's go.
Signing into law America's largest economic recovery package ever.
The stimulus bill that was signed into law by President Obama, for the record, was the single largest tax cut ever, the largest investment in clean energy ever, the single largest investment in education ever, and it was the largest investment in our nation's infrastructure, things like roads and bridges, since the Eisenhower administration. And things were just getting started.
It's as close to universal health care as America will likely ever come, and it will improve the health care of millions of Americans. In size and scope, it's being compared to Medicare and Social Security, and tomorrow, health care reform will be signed into law by the president.
After decades and decades of trying and failing, President Obama and the Democrats achieved what was long thought to be the unachievable: real, comprehensive health reform in a country that had no health system whatsoever. That was March 2010. This was 4 months later.
Almost 2 years now after the entire banking system almost collapsed, President Obama signed the financial reform bill into law.
With the stroke of a presidential pen, the new financial regulatory reform law is aimed at curbing the excesses on Wall Street while protecting average Americans who live and work on Main Street.
All told, these reforms represent the strongest consumer financial protections in history. In history.
After seeing through the bailout of a financial sector that had collapsed, a collapse that brought this country to its knees, a Wall Street conflagration that inched us toward the precipice of a second Great Depression, the president then pushed through the most significant set of financial reforms in 2 generations. And then there was more to do.
We now know who will be the next Supreme Court justice. The U.S. Senate today confirmed Judge Sonia Sotomayor as the first Hispanic justice on the Supreme Court, only the 3rd female justice in all of U.S. history.
History was made in this country today when the Senate confirmed Elena Kagan to the U.S. Supreme Court. Once she's sworn in this weekend, she'll become the current court's 3rd woman member and the 4th ever named.
President Obama is signing the New START treaty today, one of his key foreign policy goals. It cuts U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals by 1/3. More than 9 years after the September 11th attacks, first responders who were sickened at Ground Zero will have new federal health benefits. President Obama signed the 9/11 health bill on Sunday.
Today, the president also put pen to paper, signing the repeal of the ban on gays in the military.
Your country needs you, your country wants you, and we will be honored to welcome you into the ranks of the finest military the world has ever known.
The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the 9/11 first responders bill that had been inexplicably blocked in Washington for way too long, a nuclear arms treaty with Russia, 2 women appointed to the United States Supreme Court, including the first Hispanic Supreme Court justice in this nation's history. All of that was all accomplished in the first 2 years of his presidency. And then came the 2010 midterms, and the House went to the Republicans, and they pledged to oppose everything the president did. That loggerheads between the House Republicans and the White House brought us to crises like the debt ceiling fight, where congressional Republicans refused to raise the debt ceiling even though they had voted multiple times to do so under Republican presidents. They refused to do it under this president, and they thereby brought about the almost unthinkable downgrading of the country's credit rating. But even opposition that intractable cannot stop a presidency in its tracks. Colin Powell's endorsement of President Obama a little more than a week ago put part of this legacy of this presidency, I think, as succinctly as it can possibly get.
I also saw the president get us out of one war, start to get us out of a second war, and did not get us into any new wars.
President Obama did get all American combat troops out of Iraq by the end of 2011, as he promised. He sent Navy SEALs into Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden, as promised. On the one-year anniversary of killing Osama bin Laden, the president took a surprise trip to Afghanistan to sign an agreement to get U.S. troops out of that country on the timetable that he promised, once and for all. In support of the uprising in Libya against the dictator Muammar Gaddafi, President Obama did not make it an American war, despite pressure from the right to do so. Instead, he dispatched American resources and troops in support of a multilateral, multi-country effort, which did ultimately overthrow that dictatorship without ever putting American boots on the ground. He escalated economic sanctions against Iran to a degree never seen before. He came out in favor of marriage equality for same-sex couples. He extended employment benefits to same-sex partners of federal employees. And in the face of a Republican Congress that turned against its own immigration proposals because he was in favor of them too, President Obama took executive action to stop the deportation of kids who were here without papers through no fault of their own, kids who were successfully pursuing an education or career in the U.S. military. And, oh, by the way, the stock market doubled. Unemployment is below 8%. We've had 32 straight months of private sector job growth. And he quit smoking.
That's the most persistent fly I've ever seen. Nice.
Now, where were we? It is 4 long, tough years after he was elected. And we are now on the eve, literally, of another national decision about the American presidency. The case against this president from the Republican side, if you take only the serious criticism, is essentially that things could be better. That, yes, there's been a recovery, but it's not a good enough recovery. Yes, there's been economic progress, but it's not good enough progress. That Republican economic proposals, they're saying that Republican economic proposals this year, in particular, won't do what they did during the George W. Bush years. The argument from the right this time is that if we try those Republican economic proposals from the Bush years again, this time they will work better. Now, honestly, I think that is what the case against President Obama boils down to. And that's not always what the case against the president sounds like. But that is what it boils down to. And I believe that is true because the rest of the case against him that you hear so much about, if you're honest about it, is stuff that this president hasn't actually done. I mean, they say that he has raised taxes, and he has not raised taxes. They say that he's going to take away your guns, or he has taken away your guns, when this president hasn't done anything to your guns except let you take them into national parks now. They say that he has doubled the deficit. He's actually brought the deficit down by hundreds of millions of dollars since he took office. You know, when the Republicans picked as their nominee this guy this year, a guy whose campaign book was called No Apology, specifically because this guy invented the idea of an American apology tour for President Obama that he wanted to run against, even though President Obama never actually apologized for America or took an apology tour. When they picked Mitt Romney, we should have known that this was going to be a campaign that was going to aim its pointiest political attacks against things that President Obama never actually did. And so whether it is the deficit attack or the guns attack or the phony religious freedom attack or the phony apology tour attack, we have ended up with a campaign that has not much been about assessing the real things that really have happened these past 4 years, whether you agree with them or not. And a lot has happened these past 4 years, and it's worthy of debate. It's at least worthy of appreciating on the eve of this big decision that we are about to make tomorrow. 4 years after what you're looking at right here, 4 years after that historic night when the nation elected our first African-American president, we are now in the position to make a decision, not that will result in a historic election like that one. We're in the position of making a decision that will be a national verdict on what has been a historic presidency. From health reform that we had been seeking in this country for nearly a century, to the saving of the American auto industry, to the ending of the Iraq War, to the killing of Osama bin Laden, to the advancement of historic civil rights measures, this has been a presidency of historic consequence. And again, it is not just because of the man himself. It is because of what this particular man did in office in this particular 4-year period. So 4 years ago, it was Grant Park in Chicago. Tomorrow night, it's Chicago again. President Obama will be at the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago this time. At this point, he doesn't have other campaign events scheduled for tomorrow. We are to see him in Chicago when the returns are coming in. His Republican opponent, Mr. Romney, will be in Boston tomorrow night, obviously hoping for a different outcome than John McCain had 4 years ago at that sad rally in Arizona.
Before Mr. Romney gets to Boston tomorrow, he will actually do some extra campaigning. He'll still be on the trail in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. Before the nation renders a verdict on not just a president, but a presidency, whose achievements have been seen as almost beside the point in assessing whether this president gets a second term. It's the virtue of this campaign, or it's the damning criticism of this campaign, to know that this campaign, this decision, has been set up for the American people as if it has very little to do with what this president has done with his last 4 years. It has not much been about his record. It's been about a caricature of his record. It's been about the previous record of the previous president. It's been about all sorts of things that aren't about what's actually done. And that's why that list of things that have happened in the past 4 years maybe seems sort of unfamiliar. You'd think that after a campaign this long, we could all memorize that list and rattle it off in our sleep, but that's not what it's been about. If Barack Obama does get a second term, given the achievements of this past 4 years, he will likely be enshrined as being one of the most consequential presidents in modern American history. If he does not get a second term, he will be seen as a one-term president whose political failures in not achieving a second term will ultimately overshadow what he got done in terms of policy. That is what we will decide tomorrow. That is why tomorrow is such a big deal. This is about one of the most consequential presidents ever, and how it will be remembered, and whether the achievements of that presidency will be held or whether they will be clawed back. This election is worth being excited about. It is worth your taking part in it, no matter how hard anybody tries to make it for you to participate in it. This is a big deal. Dan Rather joins us next.